Praise Chapel, and all of those of you tuning in, we appreciate you tuning in. Whatever you're tuning in on, wherever you're tuning in at, we're just glad that you guys are here this evening. Don't forget that we can continue to still support this ministry, this church, this move of God via tithes, offerings, and love gifts. And we can do that through EasyTithe in your smartphone app. We can also go to easytithe.com, search Praise Chapel Fresno, and you'll see the one that you can give on. You can also go to praisechapelfresno.com, click the menu icon, go down to where you see give, click on it. It's going to take you to a third-party website we're contracted with, safe, secure, that you can continue to contribute on. We can also still mail in, drop off our tithes, offerings, love gifts to our physical address of our campus. If you don't know what that is, go to Google, search Praise Chapel Fresno, California, and you can use that address. And if you're joining us on our in-person services, we have our tithes and offerings box that's located just outside of our sanctuary. Envelopes are readily available at every chair. Just still trying to minimize as much person-to-person contact as we can. But we're still moving forward. A few questions that have been asked have been mainly about opening up Wednesday nights to in-person services at this time. I'm not exactly sure where we're going to go with that. We're still just doing live casting only at this point, but again, we're looking at the need for it, and if people really want to do it, we're going to find a way to make it work. We're going to be speaking with our senior pastors to be able to get things like this arranged and announced to you guys, so it won't just be like open and you're like, I didn't know, we'll let you guys know. But keep attuned to our Instagram, our Facebook, and our YouTube. We'll be putting all of our stuff up on our social media of things that are going to be upcoming. So just make sure that you stay on top of that, and you'll know exactly what's been going on. And we'll be announcing it as much as possible. And so we're still in our letters from Paul. We've been wrapping that up in these last couple of Wednesdays. So we're still in the book of 1 Thessalonians, and it's taking a little bit longer just because of how much Paul is actually saying with what he's writing. So it seems like with the book of Thessalonians, Paul kind of makes these really broad, generalistic terms when he first starts the letter, talking to this very young church about how pleased he is with the progress they've made. And then these last couple of chapters, chapters 4 and 5, he packs a lot of stuff in there. And it gets a little... We're going to get off into some eschatology here. We're going to get off into going into resurrection and trials and tribulations and things like that, as well as Christ's return for his people. That's going to be coming up here in a couple seconds. But last week we kind of ended it with Paul reminding the church that in the culture that they're in, to stay pure, to keep focused on where God was calling them to. And then just as he wraps it up in like one section, he kind of switches gears. So he's talking about purity between husband and wife. He's talking about purity between the culture that they're dealing with, which is just wildly, inappropriately like sexual acts in public, those kinds of things. But that's the way the Roman culture works. So now he kind of switches gears, and now he's going to get into kind of their interactions with each other. So it had to do with their interactions with basically their families. Now he's getting into interactions just with other people. And so let's look, we're going to start off in chapter 4. We're going to look at verses 9 and 10. And it says, "But concerning brotherly love, you have no need that I should write to you. For you yourselves are taught by God to love one another, and indeed you do so towards all the brethren who are all in Macedonia. But we urge you, brethren, that you increase more and more." So Paul's, I love that he puts this. He's like, concerning brotherly love, I don't need to remind you about this. And that on my end kind of seems like a very parently type of topic, right? Like a mom say, I know you're not playing with what I think you're playing with, or I know you cleaned your room this morning, right? I think that's kind of where Paul's coming from. He writes this down, but basically says, I know I don't need to write it to you. And it's like, Paul, why'd you write it down in the first place anyway? And I think it's just Paul's like in that mode of saying, like, remember to love each other. I know you're doing it already. I know I shouldn't have to remind you, but I did. Paul says the concept of loving one another is so basic, though, that we shouldn't need to be reminded of it, and yet it seems like we constantly need to be reminded to love one another. And this isn't just a love like we're talking about being nice to one another. We're talking about having the utmost respect for one another, that our interactions with each other would just exude the love that we have for each other. Now, yeah, we can have people, and you say, well, Pastor Will, but I came to church and this person made me mad. You know what? My parents are mad at me, and I've never once questioned that they don't love me, nor have people that have seen the interactions that my parents have had with me, both as a child and as an adult, that people would never guess that they are upset at me, that they're mad at me. Because the love that they have for me, the love that we should have for one another, should be unmistakable. We're not yelling at each other, we're not pointing fingers, we're not throwing swings while we're in church at one another, but Paul's just saying it's something that we should have for one another, that we should always be in this mindset of loving one another. And he's not just talking about any one place like the church, he's talking about when we're around one another, when we're around others. So he's saying it just doesn't stop in the church, that when we meet each other outside, people should still be able to feel that love for one another. This isn't just liking everyone that walks through a door either. And you say, well, I don't know them, and I'm really shy, and I don't really talk. Yeah, I get that. I really do. But there's something about connecting with people in a church that does begin to grow a community. And each community is going to have its people. You're going to have your people that are just very loud and boisterous. You're going to have your social butterflies. And you're going to have just your people that are kind of like socially awkward, that just really don't know what to say, but they're there, they're present. And Paul's just saying it's not about just liking everyone that walks through a door. It's about trying to connect with them in one place or another. He uses brotherly because he's drawing that concept of family. That a family, when we're around one another, we have this love for one another, even though we might be upset with one another. It just exists because we're family, because we have that concern for someone else, a concern that draws us into this level that says, I may be upset with you, but I still love you. So why does Paul even write it? He's telling them that the same love they have for those who attend church should also extend outside of just church and church family. That he says Jesus Christ had a love for all of mankind, and if we're called to express a Jesus-type love, he's saying that's where it should come from. It should come from this place that says we have a genuine concern for the lives of others that we come into contact with. We're called to show love that extends beyond the walls of the church, beyond the walls of our homes, and we should have the same level of concern for all those we come into contact with, all those that we see. The other day, I was bringing my daughter home from work, and this lady, bringing my daughter home from school, and we're at this really congested intersection, and this lady just, has to slam on her brakes to prevent an accident from happening. And she's kind of stopped and she's shaking. And the first thing I thought was, like, I need to get out and make sure she's okay. And I'm not saying that, that I was going to get out and be like, oh, my God, what are you doing? Well, are you okay? Are you going to do this? I just wanted to make sure that she was all right. She looked pretty shooken up because she came very close to rear-ending somebody. And she's at a very fast, she was going too fast, let's just face it. Crosses the intersection, slams on her brakes. And my first thought was, like, I hope she's okay. I hope she's there. It's just a genuine concern that we should have for others that we come into contact with. Increase more and more. Paul seems to use this theme all throughout the book of Thessalonians, this increase more and more, talking about growth individually. He does want them to grow individually, but what we need to understand is that when we grow individually inside of a church or inside of a church family, the body itself begins to grow. Look, when he talks about increasing more and more, and he's talking about personal growth and corporate growth. So when he's looking at the church, he's saying that nobody wants to take part in a group with a group of people that hate each other. Why are y'all even in the same building if you can't even stand one another? Paul's saying that people want to be surrounded by people that want to be around each other. I stand out in the foyer every Sunday and watch people walk through, and my heart just leaps when I see people walk in because I'm so excited just to be around people, just to see that people want to continue to come in. My heart just begins to leap. And Paul's saying that we should be able to show that towards people. We should be able to develop that in a sense to where we're not only personally growing, but we're growing the body in which we belong to, this corporate body. Paul's supposition is that to continue to grow, they need to grow in love as well. And that's a very basic concept when it comes to it. And Paul doesn't use this, but when you look at this concept of growing in love and growing individually and corporately, it comes from basically the sense of a marriage is that a husband and wife can love each other, but then as they continue to live their lives together, their love continues to grow every day that they're together. So that's kind of Paul saying, that every time we're together, our love for one another should be growing. It should be coming to a point that we know that we know enough about each other that we can see when something's not right. And when someone comes in and they don't look that way, like this is Paul's way of saying, go over and reach into their life. Just how are you doing? You look like you're upset. How you been? How's everything going? Is work going okay? Are you okay? And people say, but that's intrusive. That's this. No, that's family. Anytime we get around family, there's constant questions about things that we've done, or you have family visiting from like out of town during these holiday seasons. That's always going to come up. What's going on? How you been? How the kids? All this kind of stuff. It's prying, but Paul's saying that's the kind of love that should continue to grow as we're around one another. What the Bible tells us about love is that love does no evil. It's founded in truth. It protects, it trusts, and it preserves. So he's saying, don't do anything evil to anyone. Be truthful to one another. Protect and trust each other. That's where Paul's coming from this. He's saying it's a measure of just not wanting to hurt each other. Not wanting to push anyone to a point of frustration or anger. To trust each other. To be truthful. To be honest with one another. I'm a little too honest sometimes. Someone brought it up yesterday. They come in like, Pastor Will, how you doing? I said, I'm tired. And I'm saying, they're just like, you're always tired. Like, you need to get some sleep. I'm like, yeah. Tell my mind at 3 o'clock in the morning when I like wake up and I'm thinking about random things and I just can't shut my brain off. Like, I've prayed. I've done this. I'm like, God, put me back to sleep. I've thought, okay, God, I'm going to get up. I'm going to pray. I'm going to think about this. I'm awake. So Paul's telling us that to grow individually, to grow corporately, we need to also grow in love. And then verses 11 and 12, he says that you also aspire to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business and to work with your own hands as we've commanded you, that you may walk properly towards those who are outside, and that you may lack nothing. Aspiring to lead the quiet life, today's culture is so contradictory to that, right? I mean, everything that people do, they're looking for some kind of post. Every picture they put up, they're looking for people to comment and talk about how much they like what they're doing or how beautiful they are, things like this. And I think Paul's not telling us sell everything you have, become hermits, disconnect from everything going on in your culture. But I think he's saying we shouldn't really aspire to be recognized. We shouldn't really aspire. That shouldn't be what our life is focused on, like recognize me for my accomplishments. He's saying people should be able to recognize you by the Spirit of God that lives within you. And he says that's what we should aspire to live by, is people seeing the work of God in our lives. A Christian's life should be surrounded by peace and calm. Even though it never feels like we're surrounded by peace or calm, Paul's saying that's something that we should just aspire to live by. Cut those things out in our lives that constantly frustrate us, constantly confuse us, draw us into these periods where we don't know where to go with them. We're just angry. Paul says, cut it out of your life. Aspire to live a peaceful and calm life. The more noise we're surrounding ourselves with, the harder it becomes to hear the voice of God. And I think that's really where Paul brings up this, is he's saying when your own aspirations are above what God wants you to do, or when that's what your focus is, are you focusing and listening for where God is telling you to go, for where God is telling us to go? Mind your own business. I didn't even know that was a biblical concept. When I read it, I've read it, I looked in different translations of the Bible, and yeah, they don't say it exactly like that, but it's basically the same thing. Mind your own business. Biblical standard. Focus on you and your own life and the matters of your life instead of meddling in the lives of others. Paul doesn't mean that we should separate ourselves or be isolated from one another. But he's saying that we all live apart from one another and he's not saying don't have any concern for each other. He simply wants to correct the useless triviality at which we look to disturb each other's peace. So he's saying people are going to live their lives. And when we attempt to insert ourselves into these situations in their lives and say, hey, but you need to do it this way. I'll give you a quick example. You see someone come in, they look down. And you say, hey, how you doing this morning? You look a little down. Are you okay? And they go, I'm having a hard time, and I really don't want to share anything. Paul's saying, don't get in and say, no, you need to share. You need to say, because that's when release comes, and that's when you share. You voice out to God, but he's saying, look, say, I understand. I'm here for you when you want to talk. And then change the subject. It's so good to see you. I know you're talking these things aren't going right, but it's just so good to see you here. And just know, I'm around at any point. Grab me, pull me aside, even if it isn't to tell me what's wrong and it's just to yell, just yell at me. Paul's just saying, don't go around attempting to meddle, pushing things, getting things out. He's saying, just mind your own business. If they're not wanting to share it, give them their space, stay in constant contact. Yes, it's our duty to put the interest of others above our own, but not in an attempt to change or measure them to our standards. I think that's kind of how we do it. When we want people to see things our way, when we want people to understand it our way, we will spend quite a bit of time trying to change the way that they see things. And I think that's where Paul's look, mind your business. If they're not wanting to share, if they're not willing to open, if they're not going to see it your way, you don't have to change them. You just have to respect the fact that they see things differently, that they don't see it exactly the way that you do, and that's completely fine. And he says just love them and don't try to change the way that they look at anything. Yes, we point out sin, we reveal truth, but he says there's a fine line between revealing truth and trying to alter somebody's perception. He says it's up to them to define perception. It's up to us just to speak truth, to be there for one another, not to meddle. Work with your own hands. See, at this time, I love this because the Roman culture absolutely despises manual labor. So they basically go from country to country conquering them so they don't have to work. And the way that they see it is the higher the standard of the man, the less he should work. And the way we kind of see it is the higher the faith of the man, the more work that needs to be done. And he's letting them know, look, don't hit this point where you guys think oh, okay, well, we've obtained this certain level of our spirituality, so we'll leave all the work to the new people that are coming in. Paul's saying those of you that have attained such levels of faith, those of you that have attained such levels of skill and craftsmanship for the church, he says it's your responsibility to work with your own hands, to use your own skill set to benefit that. And he's just pointing this out because they're in that culture, that Roman culture that says, the more that I know, the more that I have obtained, the less work I have to do. The biblical concept is that we should always be about our work. I mean, look at it. We had Jesus Christ. He was a king who was a carpenter. Most of the apostles that start off were fishermen. Paul himself, tent builders. We've had missionaries that are tent builders. They all had jobs. The progress of the church is dependent on the work being completed by its members. So he's saying it's not new people that walk through. It's those that have said, this is my church, this is where I go, this is where I come to dwell in the Spirit of God. And he says those are the ones that have the responsibility to do their job, to do their part of their work. Paul says, don't rely on the work of others to correct your life and to keep you on the right path. The blessings of God do not come through idleness. Anytime anyone has talked about how much God has blessed them, ask them about everything that they've done up to that point. I'm telling you, very few people I've met have just woke up one day and said, and God just began to rain down the blessings. Usually there is a lifetime of work behind what they were trying to do, and God blessed that work. They weren't just standing there saying, okay, God, I'm ready for you to bless me, get it done. They were working for it. Walk properly to those outside. He's saying, be the example for those that are lost in the world to follow. Be that example. Live your life that way, that people who are on the outside can model your life and live a Christian life. And he's saying, if you follow that model, because he tells them frequently throughout this book, use me as an example, live a life that I've lived. And he's telling them, do the same thing. Walk properly to those that are outside. Verses 13 and 14, but I do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning those who have fallen asleep, lest you sorrow as others who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring him those who sleep in Jesus. In the few weeks that Paul was with this church in Thessalonica, he emphasized that Jesus was returning, right? He emphasizes that he's going to be coming back. And the Thessalonians, they believed this. They really took this to heart, and they said they really believed this. This was part of the reason that they were the kind of church that Paul complimented so highly. Yet after Paul leaves, there was some wondering about those Christians who had died before Jesus comes back. They're troubled by this idea that Christians might miss out on this future event. So this must have come from Timothy in a measure, that he's telling them, like, there's some concern for those that die before Christ's return, because just as we believe today, like, everyone will get up on a platform, every pastor will get up on a platform and say the day is drawing nigh. And I'm not telling you guys that we're not. I'm telling you we're closer than we've ever been. But what Paul is saying here is he's saying all of those that have passed away, like those, don't weep for them to a certain degree. He goes, because they're going to experience this event just as we are. Ignorant. I like that Paul really like pinpoints this whole ignorance thing. And he's speaking to the church about being knowledgeable about what they speak and know. There are 4 things in his letters that we're told not to be ignorant of. Number 1 is God's plan. He says we should know more about God's plan for our lives, well, of course, than anyone. But he's saying just don't walk around as if God doesn't have a plan. Actively search for that plan in your life. Number 2, he says we shouldn't be ignorant of our spiritual gifts. Because he says that people will go out and they'll say, thus saith God, or by the power of the name of Jesus Christ, by the power of the Holy Spirit. He's saying know exactly what you're saying when you use these terms. Don't be ignorant of the power that God has instilled within us. So he's just saying, don't open your mouth and speak for God if you don't even know what you can do, if you don't even know what he can do. That's the second thing he tells us not to be ignorant. Number 3, don't be ignorant of our trials. And he's kind of like honed in on that and saying that our trials have a purpose, that our struggles has a promise. And he's saying, don't be ignorant of that, because when people see no end or they see no point to the things they're going through, the first thing they do is just begin to give up on trying to make progress, giving up trying to move beyond that. And that's a really difficult thing that I've dealt with in my career, has been dealing with people that have received horrible news that just begin to give up and just say there is no way out. This is the end, and I'm just accepting it. And it's really difficult to deal with people like that because they see no end, they see no way out. They just basically give up. So Paul's saying, don't just give up in trials, know the purpose of your trials. The 4th thing he does here is that there is a second coming of Christ. We can't be caught off guard that Jesus is coming back for his people. And this is what he's going to be honing in on. Now, he uses a sleep, and typically this is led to express the term of death. Christians called death sleep, but they emphasize the idea of rest. So early Christians began to call their burial places cemeteries. This is where it comes from, which means dormitories or sleeping places. So they're saying it's for a short period of time. Now, however short that is, it's not for all of eternity. Eternity is in heaven. Yet the Bible never describes the death of an unbeliever as sleep. So believers refer to it as they've fallen asleep, they've met their rest. The Bible never once mentions the term sleep when it comes to a non-believer. When a sinner dies, we mourn for them. When a believer dies, we only mourn for ourselves because we know that they're with the Lord. When the Bible doesn't mention death as sleep to an unbeliever, it's because there will be no rest, there will be no peace, and there will be no comfort for those who do not accept Jesus Christ as the Lord and Savior. So it never mentions an unbeliever and uses it when they've died and uses the term sleep. For the Thessalonian church, their troubled minds were answered by the statement, God will bring with him those who sleep in Jesus. It's best to understand the words to mean that Jesus will bring the faithful departed with him when he returns. Now, he does use Jesus died. He doesn't say Jesus slept. He uses the term Jesus died. When certain Jews at the temple in Jerusalem asked Jesus for a sign, he predicted his resurrection by telling them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll build it back up. Common. The Jews thought he's referring to the actual temple that was built, that if they destroy that in 3 days, he'll build it back up. But what he's referring to, he says, but he was speaking about the temple of his body. Later, Jesus tells his disciples that he's going to die and he's going to raise again. He said he would be delivered over to the religious authorities who would condemn him and turn him over to the Gentiles, that they would mock him, spit on him, blah, 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 and kill him. But he added that after 3 days, he would rise. Yes, he predicts everything that's about to happen and then tells him he's going to die, but that he'll be risen, or that he'll rise again. So when Paul wrote about the death of believers, he called it sleep. But in his description of Jesus' death, he didn't soften it by calling it sleep, because there was nothing soft or peaceful about the death of Jesus Christ. But when he uses the term died, he's cementing in their minds, he's solidifying something with them, that his human frame was put to death. That his human frame, that he didn't just land on a cross, they put him in a tomb for 3 days, and then he comes popping out. He's bringing this out. He turns a natural event into a supernatural thought by telling them that Jesus Christ died. His human frame was broken. He died, and then he rose again in his human frame. So nature says that a dead body is buried and decays, but the supernatural element that Paul is bringing is that Jesus' human frame was resurrected, not simply in spirit, but also in body. So this is the first time that he's really going to kind of hit on that with this church, is really tell them about this whole supernatural event that happened. So I think here Paul's trying to, he's about to get into the second coming of Christ. He's about to get into resurrection and everything. But at this point, he really has to solidify, that Jesus Christ suffered a human death and his human body was resurrected by a supernatural event. So we're still wrapping up this book, Thessalonians. I'm sorry, I don't think it's dragging, but it is kind of extending out a little bit longer. But again, Paul's putting so much into this one letter that really speaks to the church. So I appreciate you guys tuning in this evening. Remember, you can continue to give, support this church, this move, via tithes and offerings. You can do that on your on Easy Tithe on your smartphone app. You can also go to easytithe.com, search Praise Chapel Fresno, and you'll see the one that you can give on. You can also go to praisechapelfresno.com, click the menu button in the upper right-hand corner, go down to where you see Give. Click on that. It's going to take you to a third-party website that we're contracted with, and you'll be able to give safe and securely. You can also continue to mail in, drop off tithes, offerings, love gifts using our address. If you don't know what our address is, just Google Praise Chapel Fresno, California, and you can mail it in there. And if you're joining us on our in-person services Sundays at 10 o'clock, we have our tithes and offerings envelopes are available at every chair, and then we have our giving box that's just outside the sanctuary, still trying to limit person-to-person contact. We love you guys. Remember to stay tuned to our social media and any announcements that we have that are going to be coming up. But we love you, and we'll see you Sunday, 10 a.m.